All right, we are back on the Press Box Podcast. Today is episode 119, and we have a very good episode today. It's I guess you can call it one of our annual episodes now, our fantasy football preview for 2022. It's that time of year again, late August. Some drafts have already happened, some are about to happen. So we're going to break down the NFL this year uh, based on fantasy football. So we're going to go by position. We're going to talk draft strategy, what to look for in the draft, position values versus other positions, everything you want to know about fantasy. We're going to discuss that this episode, and it's going to be a good one as always. But before we start, let's talk about our Twitter account at PressBoxPod. Go follow us on there. Comment if you've already had your draft or if you're about to, what you think about the draft strategy, what players you're looking at. Always like interacting with everybody that listens. YouTube, as we always say, got a lot of good clips on there. And then finally, rate and subscribe on iTunes, wherever you get your podcast. We always appreciate that as well. And let's get into it. Fantasy Football Preview 2022 right now on the Press Box Podcast.
Okay, welcome back to the Press Box Podcast. I'm your co-host, Ralph Miranda, joined by my other co-host, Joseph Miranda, and of course, our producer, Nathan Miranda. And today is our annual fantasy football preview show. As we talked about in our last show, football season is right around the corner. We talked a little preseason NFL last week, and probably every one of you listening to this podcast is in a fantasy football team. So we thought it great to continue our tradition of our fantasy football preview, and that's what we're going to do here on this episode. So we're going to talk about players. There's been a lot of movement of players in this offseason, big name players that are now with other teams, which will obviously will affect their fantasy production because some of them went to better teams, some of them didn't. It'll affect some of the players that were left on the teams that those big players left. Will they be able to get the football? Will they be able to put up the production that they put up last year? So we'll talk all about that. And I'll welcome in now Joseph, my other co-host. And Joseph, I know last year you finally got a good draft position, but I think you're back down towards the bottom this year, aren't you?
Yeah, in our league, I think I'm 10 out of 14 this year, or something like that. So, that's typical for me. But last year, I think I had the third or fourth pick, and somehow Derrick Henry fell to me.
Right.
But he ended up getting hurt. So it's a lose probably.
Yeah, that's right. Derrick Henry was producing pretty well until he got hurt and missed about half the season. So that obviously put you behind the eight ball. Nathan and I share a team, so we picked fourth, I think, this year, which at first glance you think that's a good position, but obviously if you look at your running backs, which everybody seems to take first, after the top three, it kind of falls off a little bit, unless you include Derrick Henry in the top four, which I'm not so sure I'm willing to do that this year, but we'll talk some about that. And Nathan, we're getting ready to draft number 4. What are your initial thoughts as we head into this new fantasy football season?
I have to say, I feel like I'm a little less prepared maybe than other years going in. Not that I ever really stay up to date on all the player movements and latest stories in the NFL offseason, but this year I feel like I'm a little more I have a little more catching up to do. But I like our draft position at 4. It's not bad because typically and we'll get into this more like you mentioned, but typically I feel like there's just maybe 3 or 4 at most running backs that are probably worth taking with your first overall pick. So we're kind of right on the edge of that pick order where we're going to get, I think, one of those running backs. After 4, definitely after 5, you start having to consider, I think, are these other running backs left worth taking with the first pick? But we'll get into that. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy with the order. And I think we missed the playoffs last season, right? So
We did. Yeah.
We'll have to try to bounce back and do a little something this year.
Let me start. Let's start with the running backs, and I'm going to throw out my first. First I'll go over the top five as listed by ESPN. Of course, pretty much every sports organization that puts out fantasy, Sporting News, ESPN, NFL.com, Pro Football Focus, they all put out draft cheat sheets and rate players, and most of them are pretty consistent. But we're going to use the ESPN, at least that's what we'll be referring to here tonight. Top five running backs, according to them. Number one is Jonathan Taylor of Indianapolis. Number two is Christian McCaffrey of Carolina. Number three is Austin Eckler of the Chargers. Number four is Derrick Henry of Tennessee. And number five is Najee Harris of Pittsburgh. Now, I want to throw out at first glance, the last few years, I guess, especially 2019, when Saquon Barkley was coming off his Offensive Rookie of the Year performance in 18, and McCaffrey had such a great year. Those two guys were considered the top two. They were in the top three. Well, Barkley has dropped all the way to 15th, and justifiably so. I mean, he's missed the bulk of 2 seasons with an ACL tear and other injuries. But so is McCaffrey, and they still have McCaffrey number 2. So I guess I'll throw out first, why do you guys think McCaffrey is still considered the second best running back, given the fact that he's missed the bulk of the last 2 seasons as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think he should be that high, first of all. But to make a case for why he is, I feel like when it's basically injuries. Like when he's in there, he's pretty much always productive.
Right.
I feel like Barkley's like, yeah, he missed the time of the ACL, but like a lot of games he played where he finished with like 13 carries for like 41 yards or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, he's not just ripping off huge games when he's in there. So, I think he still has a little bit more to prove. I've always said he's way overhyped, and I still think he is. But
yeah, I agree.
You can pretty much count on McCaffrey to like put up numbers and score touchdowns when he's in there. It's just a matter of like he's got a smaller frame, like he's been hurt. Like that's kind of his issue, I think, more so.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that. I like that analysis. I do think that Saquon Barkley, assuming he stays healthy, could be a little undervalued this season, only because he's going to be in an offense this year new offense, and I think they're going to try to feature him as much as possible. So, it could be that he's a little bit undervalued. We'll see as the season goes on. And then I like your point about McCaffrey. As long as he stays healthy, he should be productive. But again, he's been hurt two seasons now, and hopefully for him and all his fantasy team owners, he will stay healthy. So those are your top five. I think Najee Harris is kind of an interesting play there. He's going to have a new quarterback, obviously, because Roethlisberger retired. So we don't know how that's going to play out. But he pretty much gets all the touches on that team. Receptions out of the backfield, carries. Was very productive last year if you look at his statistics, and I think he would be a steal there at number 5. So that would be a good pick. And Austin Eckler, tremendous production. He kind of falls under the radar. A lot of times you don't think of him as one of the top fantasy backs, but he certainly has put up some pretty good numbers. Right behind Najee Harris is Alvin Kamara, but Kamara, Nathan and I were talking about this yesterday. Kamara is still awaiting punishment from the NFL for his offseason legal troubles that he had when he was at the Pro Bowl. So he could end up missing some significant time due to suspension. So I'm kind of surprised that he's rated up there number 6 as well. So again, the running backs, it's pretty much goes the way you would expect. And then after those guys, you've got Joe Mixon, you've got DeAndre Swift in Detroit, who is also pretty undervalued, I think. Leonard Fournette, again, I don't know about Leonard Fournette. He could be great, he could not be great. What are your thoughts on some of those guys?
Yeah, I think that, for me anyway, I think Derrick Henry's still the number 1 back, just because, again, like the reason, and he didn't drop all that far, but he missed time due to injury. So like when he's not hurt, and before he got hurt last season, he was still reeling off big games. Like they're just gonna hand him the ball, and he's gonna pound on defenses, and it's huge. Right. So like, right. I put him at number 1. I think. You can't ignore Jonathan Taylor up there because he had such a great year last year. But is he like a flash in the pan type guy? Is he going to keep it up? Like he doesn't have like years and years of production you can like bank on really. But I still like him up there. And then you made a good point about Najee Harris. Like Roethlisberger's been the quarterback there for the past 18 years or whatever. So, the Steelers have always been a threat to throw the ball well, right, with him. And, they've had a lot of good receivers. Well, it turns out that Mitch Trubisky or this other guy they drafted is the quarterback, and by week 4 or 5, teams realize that they have no passing game. They could load up to stop Najee Harris, and he may not be as productive. So that's something to look at there.
Yeah, that's true.
Dalvin Cook and Joe Mixon, I like them a little bit more than, 8 and 9. I think, I've always thought Mixon was a good running back. And then, the Bengals' success last year, the emergence of Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, they have a pretty good offense overall. So I like him to put up good numbers. And then, let's see. I'm with you on Fournette. I don't think you can really bank on much there, especially with their passing game. Kind of going down the list here. Once you start getting past about some of those guys at 9, 10, it's kind of a crapshoot. I don't really think that much of Ezekiel Elliott, but if he's around, I don't even know what his value is. Maybe the second round, maybe you take a chance on him that he has kind of a bounce back year,
Right.
Because he's proven that he can put together some good seasons. But that's about it. All I see there. And I'm sure we'll talk about strategy here later on, but if you can't get one of those top guys we talked about, maybe just go on to receivers or quarterbacks.
Well, Dallas also has Tony Pollard, which he got a lot of carries last year, especially when Elliott was hurt a little bit. And there was rumors from Dallas that they actually like Pollard a little bit better than Elliott now. So
Right.
Elliott may be a little bit of a crapshoot there, especially if he's sharing carries with Pollard. So that could be a problem. I looked at I guess it was the Sporting News rankings of players, and they look at clutch rating, consistency rankings, looking at players that put up are considered clutch 80% of the time, or 70% of the time, or 60% of the time. And I don't know what formula they use to determine that, but they break them down by running back, or all the positions, but with running backs, running back 1, running back 2, so forth and so on, but then a sub-tier ranking within that. So the way they break it down is among your RB1s, your running back 1s, they list Jonathan Taylor, Najee Harris, and Austin Eckler as your A-rated running backs, the guys that are the most clutch, the guys that are going to touch the ball the most, and the guys that are going to be over 80% efficient, which I think is interesting. And then they list Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, McCaffrey, Kamara, Chubb, Nixon, Fournette, Williams in Denver, and DeAndre Swift in Detroit as B rankings under that running back 1 class. So, and then of course Elliott and Barkley fall to running back 2, which I think is pretty interesting. And so does Aaron Jones of Green Bay, who gets a lot of carries as well, even though and may get more this year, considering that Aaron Rodgers is going to be playing with a bunch of no-name receivers. So that's interesting that McCaffrey in their ranking is not considered in the top 3. He's actually ranked number 6 in their ranking overall. So you have differences of opinion, based on the same way that we're talking about it. Nathan, any thoughts on the any thoughts, Nathan, on the running backs?
I understand what Josh was saying about Derrick Henry. That would be my initial thought, was he's still the number 1 running back in my book, and I was surprised when I heard Jonathan Taylor number 1. I know he had a great season, but like Josh said, that was one season. I don't think he's shown that he's that. You can really count on that to happen year in and year out. But then again, with Henry, I mean, maybe he's peaked, as far as performance. Perhaps this injury was what was it, a foot thing, right?
Yeah, I think it was a Liz Frank. Yeah,
that can cause problems, right? Especially for a runner. And
right.
I mean, who knows? So, and I feel like maybe you're just kind of chasing the production with some of these guys, where you've seen them have great years in the past when you haven't had them. So now you see their name on the board, and you think, oh, I want to get him this time. I'm going to finally cash in all these points. Well, maybe you just missed the boat. And you're just chasing these points. But try to find the next guy who's going to come up and do that type of thing.
Yeah, you benefited from that about 16 years ago when somebody was chasing Sean Alexander with the number 1 pick, and you took LaDainian Tomlinson, and he turned out to be the all-time fantasy performer that year.
he broke the record. He broke the record for was it touchdowns for a running back, right? Rushing touchdowns.
So Total
And
touchdowns, I think.
total touchdowns.
Yeah.
I mean, he was throwing touchdowns, running touchdowns, catching touchdowns. I mean, it was just amazing.
I think you rode him all the way to second place.
I did. I got second. I don't know how I didn't get first, but I got second. Yeah, I think I had the second pick that year, and all the fantasy lists were showing Shaw Alexander number 1, LT number 2. I'm pretty sure. And
Exactly.
I thought I was hoping I thought I would take LT even if I had the number 1 pick. I didn't want Shaw Alexander. He always seemed kind of soft to me. So then luckily they got to take Shaw Alexander. I took LT, and yeah. I don't know. The team that beat me, I wish I could remember who they had, because maybe that was just a week. Maybe that was just a week where LT only scored like 1 touchdown or something, and then his other guys went off on the other team. I don't know.
But you make an excellent point, Nathan, and I want to talk a little bit about that, chasing production. I mean, I think that's a tremendous point, is that whenever you sit down and look at fantasy for the first time as you're going into a new year, all these rankings are based on what these guys have. A lot of it is based on what these guys have done the year before, so it's hard because, like, as you said, you look at this, and Jonathan Taylor's, I guarantee you, I shouldn't guarantee it, but I feel almost 98% sure that come draft time, most people who have the number 1 pick are probably going to take Jonathan Taylor. Okay?
And probably because he's listed number 1 on the running backs.
Exactly. That's what I mean. And now, is he going to be what he was last year? I don't know. They've got a new quarterback. They've got Matt Ryan, the Colts. Is that going to help him, or is that going to hurt him? We don't know. It could help him, or it could also hurt him. So, it's hard to chase that production. I think you have to dig a little deeper and look at some of these consistency rankings. Guys like, Derrick Henry. Joseph brought it up. I mean, he may get hurt again. But if he doesn't, I don't care who their quarterback is. He's going to produce. I mean, he's going to catch it out of the backfield. His receptions have gone up over the last few years, and he's going to be a beast when it comes to running the football. So that's a guy that, you can almost bank on, assuming that he doesn't get hurt.
Yeah, Austin Eckler's a guy too. I don't know if I had him on a team that you and I shared, or if it was one of my solo teams in years past.
I think it was one of yours. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I had him one time, and I remember I got him as just kind of like a flex, like he was a later pick, and he did really well for me. I remember he was one of my best performers, and I feel like he's always been that type of guy though, where he's always going to perform really well, but he's never been considered like a top running back. But for some reason, I don't know why this year he's never 3rd running back. I'm not saying it's over. I'm not saying it's not warranted, because, like I said, he's a great performer. I just wonder why all of a sudden, in the mind of the people who make this list, what changed? Like, I feel like he's always been kind of a guy who catches a lot of balls and gets a lot of production. I don't know, but so I like him as a pick too. But I remember back when you used to be able to get him a little later rounds, and use him as like a flex or something.
Well, when I look at this list, the guys that I look at that I would say you're not chasing production, guys that are on this list highly ranked because of consistent performance, I would look at Eckler, I would look at Derrick Henry, I would look at Dalvin Cook, I would look at Nick Chubb. Those are guys that I look at and say, hey, these guys have done it at a pretty consistent level. Kamara, yes, but we don't know what his status is going to be. Najee Harris, he's had 1 great year, but again, we don't know. Jonathan Taylor, 1 great year. Mixon, like Joseph said, we don't know. I mean, he should be pretty good, but again, we don't know. So, I mean, there's very few players that you can say, hey, these guys have been consistent, even though they may not be ranked 1 or 2, but they're pretty consistent. So I think those are the ones that you have to kind of look at.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's go ahead and talk about the receivers then.
Okay.
I think that, and you touched on this a little bit in the open, that more so than running backs, receivers obviously rely on the quarterback. So I think you're going to see guys like Tyreek Hill especially take a drop in production, because Tua is not going to be able to get him the ball like Mahomes did. It's just a fact.
Correct.
And then you've got Devontae Adams. Rodgers to
Russell Wilson.
Rodgers to Derek Carr is not as big of a drop off as
that's right.
Mahomes to Tua. So I think you'll see him take a little hit, but I think not as much. And they play together in college at Fresno State, so there's a little bit of a connection there. So again, I don't think he's going to be the Devontae Adams like he was in Green Bay, but he'll still be very productive. Cooper Kupp's a guy that, like, he had his breakout year last year, obviously, like career year, but I don't know. He's not just like, I don't know. He's not like a big time playmaker that's just going to get open like some of these guys. I think they have to kind of like scheme for him to be open. He's like a slot type receiver, more so in my mind, anyway. So I don't know that he'd be my top receiver off the board. I like Justin Jefferson. He's especially in the PPR league, he's going to get a ton of catches. If you value Deebo Samuel, like kind of playing running back, also like he'll get some carries and rushing yards. That could be a good play. I mean, all those Mike Evans, Brady's going to get him the ball, obviously. It's interesting, receiver class this year or group where some of your top guys are changing quarterbacks, and that could throw a wrench into things.
Well, it's interesting. You talked about Cooper Kupp. Nathan and I were talking about him some yesterday. Again, at first glance, you would think, well, you might be chasing production because he's had one tremendous year. But I was reading a little bit about him, and this is pretty amazing. He led all wide receivers last season in snaps, targets, receptions, receiving yards, touchdowns, expected touchdowns, touches, yards per route run, and fantasy points. He outscored the next closest wide receiver by 96 fantasy points and finished a ridiculous 15 of 17 weeks as a top 12 scorer at the position. And, oh, by the way, he was also the most valuable player of the Super Bowl. So, this guy is pretty amazing. And I just think that, his production is probably going to fall off this year. There's no way he's going to have that same season. If he does, it's amazing. But even if it drops off, like Nathan said yesterday, even if instead of 96 points above every other receiver, he's 20 above every other receiver, he still has a tremendous season. And Sporting News ranked him as the number one receiver in the wide receiver one class. They only list three guys as A sub tiers in the wide receiver one: Kupp, Justin Jefferson, and Devontae Adams. So, so that's pretty interesting if you ask me.
Who's the Justin Jefferson guy?
He plays for Minnesota. He was a rookie a couple of years ago. Plays for Minnesota.
Okay.
Well, he set the rookie record for catches, and then he had another good year last year. So
he's. I'll read you a little bit about Justin
What number
Jefferson.
is he? Maybe that would jog my memory. You know what number he is?
18. I think he's 18, right?
18. Yeah, that's right.
Doesn't do
right. He had 88 catches for 1,400 yards and 7 touchdowns as a rookie in 2020. Last season, 2000. Let's see. His 2,082 air yards led the NFL near the goal line. His 15 end zone targets, ranked second. He's 23 years old. He's going to be working in a new offense, but we can still expect roughly 30% of his throws to head in Jefferson's direction. He is an elite fantasy option. So he's obviously a very productive receiver, and I think he's going to continue to be as young as he is.
What's the deal with Deebo Samuel? Is he not? He doesn't want to be in San Francisco, right, or something?
No, they gave. Yeah. Go ahead, Joseph. Go ahead.
And they signed him to a 3-year extension, a 3-year deal, so he's going to be there.
So he's happy now.
Yeah.
He got the money he wanted. Okay.
And the thing about Deebo Samuel is they use him in the run game too.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. I feel like for some reason he seems like. Well, I guess anybody that's going to run that much could. Any receiver who's not actually a running back who runs it that much is more chance for injury, I feel like.
Oh yeah, obviously. Yeah.
And DK Metcalf used to be a good option, but to Joseph's point about who's throwing to these guys now, I would stay away from him. I mean, who's going to be throwing to him? I don't
know. Either Geno Smith or Drew Lock. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In fact, they list him number 20. The Sporting News lists him as the 20th ranked wide receiver, and I think ESPN lists him as 21. So yeah, his stock has fallen a little bit, and he's not going to have a very good passer behind him.
Juju Smith-Schuster is interesting though, because Kansas City lost Tyreek Hill. Maybe he could fill in and be the new Tyreek Hill type of guy. I know he's not quite that caliber, quite that speed, but who knows?
Yeah,
who knows?
He's not as athletic as Tyreek Hill, though.
Yeah,
that's true. And Nathan made a good point yesterday when we were talking. Nathan and I took Kelsey the last 2 years. last year he kind of petered out, Kelsey, the last 5 or 6 weeks of the season, and we were discussing, have the Chiefs kind of started the downslide? Most teams have an upslide when they're starting to get to greatness. And the Chiefs went to the Super Bowl 2 years in a row, and they went to the AFC Championship game 4 years in a row. But are they starting maybe to go down? Are they going to be as productive? They lost Tyreek Hill. Is Kelsey going to be as productive now without Tyreek Hill there? Mahomes, he's still going to be productive, but I just don't know if you want to bank your fantasy season on Chiefs players right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't. I think, that time is past now. You just bank on Chiefs players. I agree with that. If you want to take Mahomes, obviously, it's a high quarterback pick, and that's fine. Other than that, I would kind of tread lightly on some of those guys.
And then if you look at some of the other wide receivers, Deebo Samuel, we talked about him. Jamar Chase, that's a guy that put up tremendous numbers last year as a rookie. You would think that he would do the same, but again, I kind of hesitate with the Bengals because they had a tremendous season last year, but now teams are not going to take them lightly. Not that they were before, but you just wonder if defenses now are going to be scheming to take Jamar Chase out of the game. You know what I mean? And not that they can do it, but they're certainly going to try. So you wonder about him.
I feel like he kind of burst onto the scene midway through last year, though. So, like, by the late regular season and playoffs, especially, they were trying to take him away. So
that's true.
I think he'll be pretty productive this year.
What about CeeDee Lamb? I think he's going to be a big. They lost the Cowboys lost Amari Cooper to the Browns. So CeeDee Lamb now kind of becomes their wide receiver one, if you will. He had a good season last year, and I think obviously with the NFL throwing the ball over 60% of the time, I look for him to have a good season this year as well.
Yeah, I think so. Dak Prescott, he usually throws for a lot of yards. Really, you can argue about how much of a winner is he, but I feel like he pretty routinely throws 400 yards every week or close to it.
Right.
So,
right. He's a good fantasy quarterback.
Yeah, he's going to be having to throw to somebody. So that's somebody that I don't want to call him underrated, but maybe not as a household of a name as some of those other guys we talked about. They could be a good option.
Right. And then you got guys like Terry McLaurin at Washington. He had a good season last year. A.J. Brown went to Philadelphia. He was a big target for Tennessee when he was there. Interesting that Michael Thomas, who was the number one fantasy wide receiver just a couple of years ago, has now dropped all the way down to 29. So he's kind of out of the mix.
Yeah, it's because he hasn't really played in almost 2 years. He's played games, but not consistently. And when he was leading the league in receiving, Drew Brees was his quarterback. Now it's, I guess, Jameis Winston, or
it's still Jameis Winston.
Yeah. So, he's a guy that you take maybe a late flyer on and see what he's got.
I like Keenan Allen too, because when we get to the quarterbacks, because I really like Herbert, and Allen's a guy that's always been, I think, near the top of the receivers list, even before he had a quarterback like Herbert.
That's true.
I guess he had Rivers, so he was great, but he's consistently up there. And now he's got a quarterback who I think is one of the best, certainly one of the best young quarterbacks in the league, maybe just one of the best quarterbacks, period, probably in the league. So I like him.
Hey, does anybody remember a guy named Julio Jones? Hey, he's now the 67th rated wide receiver.
Amazing.
He's with Tampa Bay now, so I think he's kind of close to the end of his career.
Yeah, that might be an interesting pick, though. It's in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't think Brady will find a way to kind of rejuvenate his career and utilize him in new ways? I'm sure he will.
I'm sure he will. That's exactly right. I'm sure he will. So that'll definitely be interesting to see what happens. All right, so let's move on to the tight ends first before we get to the quarterbacks. Nathan and I, again, were talking about this yesterday. I think after the top 4 or 5, there's a tremendous drop-off in tight ends. And going back to what Joseph said about Devontae Adams being Derek Carr's college teammate, I think the guy that's going to suffer the most from that is Darren Waller. Darren Waller was kind of a big target for Derek Carr, but now he's got Devontae Adams, and he's going to be trying to force the ball to Devontae Adams. So I think Darren Waller's production is going to fall off.
Yeah, probably right. fall off in terms of he's not going to put up like basically like wide receiver numbers like he was putting up.
Right.
But I still think he's a pretty good tight end option. I'm wondering kind of why he's below Kyle Pitts from Atlanta, where like Matt Ryan's not there anymore. Who's starting for Atlanta? Am I miss? Is it
They got the rookie listed as the starter right now. The kid from Cincinnati.
yeah.
What was his name? Oh goodness gracious.
I know that they have Marcus
Redmond.
Mariota also. Yeah.
Yeah, they got Marcus Mariota. They got Desmond Ritter. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Marcus Mariota.
that's
Yeah. Marcus
guys,
Mariota is
I
not
mean,
going to be the guy.
no. Well, say what you want about Matt Ryan, like he's better than those two guys. So I mean, I don't see unless they're just counting on him to be like a security blanket for these quarterbacks and just like dumping balls out like over the middle constantly, and which I guess helps in the PPR league. But you know, him and even I don't know. I'd still rate Kittle, Waller, and Kelsey above Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts. I mean, that's because again, I talked about Kyle Pitts. Then Mark Andrews, you've got Lamar Jackson throwing him the ball. Where I mean, we've talked about Lamar Jackson. Like, not really going
Ad
to air it
nauseam.
out. Like, yeah, he's not going to like air it out all over the place and just beat teams with his arm on Sundays. So I don't know how productive their receivers / tight ends are going to be week after week either.
And half the time he's running himself, so that's one less pass attempt he's going to have.
Well, remember though, ESPN's got Mark Andrews rated as the number 1 tight end, and Sporting News has him number 2. But you got to remember, we talked about Lamar Jackson, but remember when we were talking about quarterbacks, and we've discussed this many times, Lamar Jackson has trouble throwing the ball outside the numbers, but he doesn't have trouble throwing it inside the numbers. And that's where he throws to Mark Andrews quite a bit on those seam routes. So Mark Andrews has had a lot of production, and I think he's still going to get it because whenever Lamar Jackson does throw it, that's where he's most productive. So I think in my book, I would stay away from any wide receiver that's on Baltimore's team. I mean, because I just don't think that. And if you look at the wide receivers, not to jump back into them, I don't see a Baltimore wide receiver until number 34, Rashad Bateman. I mean, they basically have no wide receivers. So I would think that if anything, Andrews should still get a lot of targets.
Yeah,
that's probably the idea. But these teams know that. I mean, don't you think they're going to try to force him to throw it to the sidelines and stuff? Like, I don't know. Right? Like, yeah, I mean, he's Andrews is going to get catches, but I just don't know that he's like number 1 worthy for the reasons we talked about.
Tight ends are strange to me. I feel like they're kind of shifting in my book, or at least their place in my draft strategies is maybe shifting because the last few years when Kelsey was as dominant as he was, and Kittle was for a year maybe he has some injuries and stuff, but and then even going farther back, you had guys like Vernon Davis who was just dominant for a few years. I feel like tight ends used to be, I feel like, maybe more valuable than receivers because some of these tight ends, they were basically receivers. They basically were receivers. People like
Gronkowski too. Yeah.
Gronkowski, right? Kittle, Vernon Davis. They were basically receivers, and they were bigger and more physical receivers. And they got more targets than receivers. They were like security blankets for the quarterbacks a lot of times. They definitely got more goal line targets than receivers a lot of times, or red zone targets. But so I used to think, okay, they're probably better than receivers, actually. I mean, if you can get a number 1 tight end before any type of number 1 receiver, or a couple tight ends even before you get a receiver, and also another reason I thought that was a good strategy is because I think most teams, most fantasy teams value receivers more than tight ends. So you can get maybe 2 great tight ends before they're gone too quickly. But now I'm thinking with the slowing of Kansas City's offensive power, which I agree with Joseph, I think is their best days are behind them. And then some of these other, like Gronkowski not, being out of the league, and of course Vernon Davis has been out of the league for a while, and seeing some of these names that are now high on this list, I'm starting to think, maybe like that heyday of tight ends is kind of over. I wouldn't know if I'd feel comfortable taking one of these tight ends right now before I would take one of the top receivers. Whereas before I used to be, I definitely would. I definitely wouldn't feel comfortable right now taking 2 tight ends before number 1 receiver. So
Right.
for some reason, I can't, and that's about as in depth as I could go, I guess. I mean, maybe there's some other reason why, if this is even true, why that would be the case. But it just seems like they're not being, I don't know, it just seems like they're not putting up the same type of production or being utilized like I used to see them. Like Ertzer's another guy. He had a year or two where he was pretty much like Kelsey, right? I mean,
Right.
and then I think I got him like a little too late. I had him on one of my teams like the year after he went off one of those years, and now he's ninth on the list. I don't know, but I definitely agree there. After Andrews, Kelsey, I would say after Andrews and Kelsey, and I think Kittle should maybe be the number 3 tight end. But
I agree.
after those 3 guys, it's a huge drop off. Like I don't know.
Well, after those guys, the only names that jump out to me that I would even consider taking would be I would still consider Darren Waller. I would still consider Zach Ertz in Arizona. I would consider Tyler Higbee with the Rams, and even this guy Schultz with Dallas. He seems to get a lot of targets as well. And Gesicki with Miami. He still gets some targets, and this is an interesting point that I thought about. You guys can tell me if you agree or disagree. When it comes to tight ends, I'm almost more inclined to take a guy that's not with a really good quarterback, because really quarterbacks that have trouble getting the ball deep. So tight ends are going to be kind of their safety valve. You know what I mean? Whereas your really good quarterbacks, they're going to be looking to push the ball deep down the field, and they're going to be going to the Devontae Adams and the Cooper Kupps of the world. And your tight ends are going to kind of get the table scraps. I mean, what do you think about that?
I agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's not wrong. But if you're going to employ that strategy, then just wait and take a tight end a little later.
Right. I agree.
I wouldn't take a tight end at a higher pick with that in mind. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, you take a tight end higher pick, hoping for like a big time production like Kelsey or Kittle. But yeah, I think that's a good strategy where you're just like, okay, I'm going to load up on the receivers and the running backs that I can get, hopefully, and then maybe take a lesser tight end, or not a lesser tight end, but a tight end that you feel is going to get catches from a quarterback that's like average. If that makes sense, right? So
right.
I see where you're going with that.
And that obviously is more important at a point per reception league too. But and then also, like, to your point too, that the deep threats are always going to be the receivers, right? So a lot of these prolific offenses, they score on a lot of long touchdown passes, which kind of takes the tight end out of touchdown range.
Right.
I mean, like, some of these teams, they drive down the field and they get in the red zone, then the tight end becomes more valuable to them, I think. And they look for him around the goal line. But if you're scoring on long touchdown passes, if you have a really great deep threat, then that kind of starts to make you question their tight end. Except, I mean, there's always exceptions to that rule, like Gronkowski in his heyday, or even Kelsey. They had Tyreek Hill, who was a deep threat, but Kelsey was just as important, really. I mean, to their offense. But and then another guy like I don't know if there's anybody anymore. Kelsey maybe kind of used to be that way to Mahomes. Maybe he's going to become more like what I'm about to say, since Mahomes doesn't have Hill. But I don't really see any guys that are like a Jason Witten, who just you should know Romo was look for Witten anytime he felt flustered in the pocket, anytime they needed a first down, like on a third down or something. They were looking for Witten on the goal line. Witten was just he got so much attention from Romo. I don't know if many tight ends fall into that category anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's move on to the quarterbacks finally. Quarterbacks, obviously, according to ESPN and according to the Sporting News, Josh Allen of Buffalo is considered by far and away the number one quarterback. In fact, Sporting News, he's the only one they give an A sub rating in the quarterback one class. Right behind him is Justin Herbert of the Los Angeles Chargers. And interesting that ESPN has Tom Brady ranked 8th. Sporting News has him ranked 3rd. Mahomes is 4th in the Sporting News. He's 2nd in ESPN. Burrow is 5th in the Sporting News. He is 11th. Yeah. 11th. So interesting to see the differences there. But Josh Allen, he's an interesting character. I know, Joseph, you weren't very high on him last year, and he did make some really bonehead. Yeah, I know you're not. But he does put up a lot of numbers, both rushing and receiving. And he seems to be everybody's darling right now as far as fantasy quarterback.
Yeah, I don't get why he's a full 10. Like the ESPN overall rankings, He's a full 10 slots ahead of Mahomes, who's second. Like,
Right.
okay, like we're talking about fantasy, so forget about winning and all that. So
Right.
even with fantasy, like he's gonna throw interceptions. He's gonna play at least probably 2 or 3 games then towards the end of the year that's like 20 degrees in Buffalo and it's windy. And it's gonna I know he has a strong arm, but that's gonna affect him somewhat or affect the game plan, or it could be snowing. You gotta take that into effect a little bit. I don't think Stephon Diggs is like all that great. So and that's his best receiver. I mean, he had the past couple years he's had Cole Beasley up there.
Right.
I'm not sure if he's still with him or not actually.
No, he's a free agent right now.
Okay. So he was a guy that got a lot of catches for him. So I think you know I don't know why Brady's ranked all the way down at 8th in ESPN. You said Sporting News had him at 3. Like, didn't he lead the league in like touchdowns and yards last year
Yeah, I
or
think he
something?
did. Yeah.
Like a couple categories he led the league in. Like, I mean, I guess eventually he's gonna stop being that way. But like you would have said that 4 or 5 years ago too. So I think Brady's gonna put up big numbers again. Like, well, like is anybody gonna be surprised if he ends up with 4,000 yards and 35, 40 touchdowns? Like, no. So I mean,
Right.
I think that's a pretty safe bet. I like Herbert, like Nathan talked about earlier. Um, uh, you know, I'd be okay with Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray. Like if you're looking for the rushing production also, because they're going to get some of that. Again, I'm talking
Right.
strictly fantasy production here. I'd be okay
Correct.
with either of those two. And then lastly, I'd feel okay with Prescott. Like I said, he throws for a lot of yards. Like so, those are some of the guys I look at. And lastly, I'll touch on Joe Burrow a little bit. Like that's an interesting one to me. I can see it kind of going both ways. Like you talked a little bit about the chasing production or like what they did in the past. So he did get to the Super Bowl, but like this could be a season where he breaks out from week one and like leads the league in passing and touchdowns, and the Bengals are like 13-1 at some point. It could be like that, or it could be he like takes a little bit of a step back and he's not the Super Bowl quarterback we saw last year. I just don't know which way it's going to go. So if you want to take a gamble on Joe Burrow, you could get like a big time season, or you could not.
Yeah. Well, I kind of agree with Nathan a little bit. Actually, a lot. He mentioned Herbert. Herbert's ranked number 3 in ESPN. He's ranked number 2 in Sporting News. He's a guy that I think he could possibly lead the quarterbacks on fantasy points this season. I mean, when you look at, he's got Austin Eckler in the backfield. He's got Keenan Allen at wide receiver. He's got Mike Williams at wide receiver. He's got a pretty good offensive line, and he's proven that he's the guy that's matured. I mean, this will be his 3rd year in the league. I think I think he gets it. He also can run the ball a little bit if he needs to. I like Herbert. I like him a lot, and I think he could be a guy that challenges Josh Allen for that number 1 spot. Brady. I think I said this last week when we were talking about the preseason. Brady just worries me, and what I mean by that is, don't get me wrong. I mean, he's a great quarterback. He's proven. He doesn't have to prove anything to anybody anymore. But anybody that takes time off in the preseason, granted, he doesn't need it. But what I read today is he took it off because his wife wanted him to spend time with her. So they went on a cruise and they went on a vacation. And I'm thinking to myself, you're an NFL quarterback. I don't care if you're year 1 or year 21. You should be in camp with your guys, okay? And I just wonder how committed he is to playing football. Now, an uncommitted Tom Brady is probably better than 90% of the other quarterbacks, but I just wonder from a fantasy standpoint, is he going to be the same guy that we all think he's going to be?
I think he is. Yeah. I mean, like I don't really, I didn't see that story or whatever, or why he took the time off. But even whatever the case is, if that's true, I think he realizes like, okay, I can afford to take this time off and still, I know what I need to do. Like I'll still be ready. Like I think, or I'd hope he realizes that he can get away with this time off and still be the same Tom Brady, which I think he will be. I mean,
right.
And we talked a little bit about this in the last podcast that if you're a fourth, fifth year quarterback, sixth year, even 10-year quarterback, yeah, you need to be with your team in camp. But if there's one guy that doesn't, it's him. And the guys understand that. Like, I don't think they care. I think they're like, yeah, he can do whatever he wants. Like, he's like the Michael Jordan of football, arguably. So, like, I don't think that's an issue. I think he'll be fine. If anything drops off his production, is just going to be the fact that he's 45. Then eventually the time has to come where he's not elite. So
Right.
I'd be okay taking him. I don't know. Obviously, everybody is in different leagues. The consensus might be that like to not draft him as high. So if you can get
Yeah.
him maybe a little bit later round, that's good as well.
While
Yeah,
we're talking quarter,
Okay.
go ahead, Nathan.
No,
No, go ahead. No, you go.
No, I agree with what Joseph said. That I think he's not going to be too high in the minds of a lot of fantasy people when they draft. So you can maybe get him at pretty good value at a certain spot. But I saw some speculation online that maybe he was missing because he's going to be on The Masked Singer, that TV show.
Mhm.
What?
I just said what?
Oh, yeah, you know that show, The Masked Singer?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Singer.
Yeah, where they like somebody comes out and like sings and they're in like a costume and then they have to guess who it is and they take. There was a bunch of speculation that he was doing that. That's why he was missing. I don't know, but I think you're right. You should be in camp with your guys especially if you're a quarterback. But not doing that, I think, is maybe doesn't look good and maybe affects the chemistry on the team. But I don't know if that affects his actual production. Like on the field, like from a stats point of view. But
Let's talk a little bit about while we're talking quarterbacks. Let's talk a little bit about Kyler Murray. Nathan and I had him last year. He started out really well. He kind of fizzled out a little bit at the end of the season, which he's been doing every year that he's been in the league. It seems like the second half of the season he kind of fizzles out. Now he's got Marquise. What was his name? Marquise Brown as receiver. Nathan and I were talking about DeAndre Hopkins. He's ranked 45th, but we couldn't figure out why. But now I'm reading that he's been suspended and he's going to miss half the fantasy regular season because of his suspension, and he's 30 years old. So he doesn't have DeAndre Hopkins for a while. He's got Zach Ertz. I'm not sure that Kyler Murray is on the upside. I think he's going downhill. I mean, I don't look at him as I look at Lamar Jackson. I mean, I just don't think that he's a guy that you want to hang your fantasy season on.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would rather have Lamar Jackson, like you said, and
me too.
I'd be okay with somebody taking Murray for like the dual production, the running and throwing. But I kind of agree with you. I could see the Cardinals, being 7-10, even 6-11, something like that, as opposed to like the hot start that jumped out to last year. I think it was 7-1 or 8-1, something.
Right.
I could definitely see them taking a step back for all those reasons you mentioned.
I agree with that. I would rather if you want to take a dual threat quarterback, I think I'd take Lamar Jackson ahead of him probably. But even some of these other guys who, like Mahomes, is basically dual threat. I mean, right? Josh Allen kind of is too. I mean, he didn't have the same type of athleticism and speed as these guys, but he runs it quite a bit. But Joseph, do you still have the same position? I remember, I think it was last year you were talking about your theory on quarterbacks that, like, I guess I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think your general take was that the way the league is now with its pass-heavy league, that, I mean, any given week, any one of these guys could put up a few hundred yards, a couple of touchdowns. Like, is it that important, do you think, to take a high like other positions? It's very important you get a high running back because they're a lot different than the lower running backs. Like we talked about, each position is that way. There's a big drop off in quarterbacks, though. Like, Zach Wilson can put up 350 yards and 2 touchdowns. Something like is it that? And maybe it's not as consistent, but I think that's the one position maybe where you don't have to try to reach to get one of these high value guys because, like, even look at Aaron Rodgers is 9th, and I know he didn't have the same offense around him, but I'd be happy to have Aaron Rodgers. You know what I mean? Like, and he's number 9.
Well,
I mean, so like, do you really need to try to get a top 5 quarterback?
Yeah, I know I said that, and I agree with that. And like the ESPN overall rankings kind of reflect that. Like Josh Allen's their number 1 quarterback, but he's 43rd overall.
Yeah,
They're saying there's 42 more valuable players fantasy wise out there across the positions than him. So I see that I see that side of it, and I think that yeah, like you could look pretty much on the waiver wire any week. There's going to be a starting quarterback out there that could, like you said, theoretically throw for 300 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns. Not maybe a little, like you said, maybe a little less consistent, but
Yeah.
That's true. But also, yeah, I think you take care of at least one top flight running back, one receiver, maybe even another one before a quarterback. But if you can get like a good quarterback, and again, it's a passing league, so maybe there's a lot of these guys out there. I think I had Brady last year, at least maybe one of my leagues, maybe it was our league. Like they're quarterbacks, as much as the ball is thrown, they can consistently get you 20 to 25 points every week, just like lock it in almost.
Yeah. Well, that's
So I mean,
good.
whereas I don't know that's totally true for running backs and receivers. Like they're going to have big weeks, but an Aaron Rodgers, a prime Aaron Rodgers, or a prime Brady or Mahomes, you can pretty much count on 20 plus points every week.
Yeah. Well, that's the flip side of that argument, which I'm glad you brought that up because I remember that's a good flip side to that too. Is that they touch the ball every snap, so they have the potential to get points.
Right.
Every snap, and like you're right. It's gonna be a stress for running back to get 20 plus points. You're gonna have to really like do something spectacular. So it's easy for a quarterback to get 20 plus points.
Right.
It's not that hard. So that's the flip side of it. But then take the highest quarterback you can take them because he's touching the ball every snap. It's not as hard for him to get a lot of points in the game. So so I feel like those are two dueling kind of points of view and it all depends on though, of course, where you draft at too.
Yeah, that's true. Like we talked about at the start, and I guess this has led into our conversation about draft strategy. But and with the 10th pick out of 14, like I guess you kind of have to look at who's drafted ahead of you, right? I mean, you have your eye on a running back or receiver, and if they're taken, then maybe I don't know. I still don't know that I'd go quarterback first pick because even if you do have a lower pick, it's probably a snake draft. So you'll get that second round pick pretty soon, and there'll still be probably maybe only 1 or 2 quarterbacks taken, if that. Right. So first pick, I'd still, if you can't get one of those running backs, I'd probably default to a receiver. And then again, there's really no wrong way to draft. So you could take another receiver if you want, or it just depends like what you want to do.
Well, I'm kind of wondering about first let me make one comment that I've been thinking about. I don't look at Mahomes and Josh Allen as dual threat quarterbacks. Those are guys I think that run when they need to. I think Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray and Deshaun Watson when he comes back, those are guys that I think are true dual threat quarterbacks. But anyway, that's besides the point. I think quarterbacks, if you remember about 5-6 years ago, they were considered the top guys. That all of a sudden they fell out of favor, and I think, like Nathan said, these guys touch the ball every snap. Okay. So, Joseph, you mentioned, you could pretty much find any quarterback in today's NFL that could throw for 250 or 300 yards a game. So if these guys throw for 2 touchdowns and 300 yards, you got 18 points right there. So if you can get 18 points from your quarterback every week, that's pretty solid production. And then once in a while, they're going to get you a whole lot more. And then every once in a while, they might get you a little less. But my point is, I still think a quarterback is a very valued position, even though when you look at, like you said, if you look at the, the top 300 overall players, maybe you've got it in front of you quicker than I do. But the first quarterback I see is
43.
43. Yeah. I mean, that's amazing to me. I mean, they have Josh Allen rated below Ezekiel Elliott. They have him rated below Cam Akers, Saquon Barkley. I mean, that just is amazing to me because if a novice fantasy player is going down that list, why would you take Saquon Barkley before Josh Allen if you had the chance to take either one of them? You know what I mean? So I don't know.
Well, maybe because, like we're saying, that quarterbacks, they're all going to touch the ball every play. They all have it's relatively easy for them all to put up a lot of points if they can just throw a few touchdowns. And running backs, it's so hard to find a productive running back after you get at the top, 5 or so. So maybe that's why they think, hey, first quarterback's number 43, not because he's going to get any less points than these other guys, but you better get your running back. You better get your because you can always wait on a quarterback. Maybe that's the thing. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying maybe that's
I think that's a good point because especially in a 14-team league, we've all been there where it's like week 9 or 10, and if you don't have 2 solid running backs to plug in there, like you're not finding anybody, you're done. Like you're like there's nobody in the waiver wire that's getting more than like 1 or 2 carries.
Yep.
And there's like you're just kind of hopeless at running backs. So I do see that point where you need to get your 2 running backs that are going to be starting running backs and need to get touches. Whereas if it's week 11 or 12 and you need a quarterback, like we said, you could look on the waiver wire and see, oh, there's Zach Wilson, or oh, there's Mitch Trubisky. Well, they're not super consistent, but you could put them in there and at least have some hope that they could throw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's possible.
Yeah.
Same with some receivers. Like there's receivers on the waiver wire that are going to line up on the field and start the game and could theoretically get 6 or 7 catches for 100 yards. Whereas running backs, it's not even possible.
Yeah, right. And you can play matchups more with the quarterback too. If they're playing a horrible defense, it might not be a great quarterback, but he may have some good production against that defense. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like that type of thing. You don't need consistent production from your quarterback if you're going to kind of play quarterbacks in and out and pick up guys based on matchups. You don't really need one guy throughout the whole year.
All right, so let's look at let me ask this question. Let's look at it this way. We're in a 14-team league, so the first 2 rounds there's going to be 28 picks. Obviously, you're going to get 2 picks. Everybody's going to get 2 picks in the first 2 rounds. Okay, some are going to get them. If you're number 7 picking, you're going to get them spread apart. If you're near the top, you're going to get 2 pretty close, and if you're near the bottom, you're going to get 2 pretty close. But my point is, then, do you take 2 running backs with your first 2 picks? Or do you take a running back with your first pick and look to take somebody else with the second pick?
It all depends on where you draft. I mean, if you have the first overall pick, I probably take a running back. Like I personally, I said I'd probably take Derrick Henry. But when it comes back to you and you now have the 28th overall pick, but it's still the second round, there's going to be probably no running back left at that point. So that's where it's kind of a crapshoot. Like, do you take the other running back that's a starting running back, so you have those 2 guys you can pretty much start every week, or you take a pretty almost a top flight receiver if he's available, or you know what I mean? So it's difficult. Like I don't know.
I think if you have within the top 4 picks, I think you definitely take a running back because you're going to get the top 2.
Right.
Once you get outside of that, it becomes a little touch and go. It's a little iffy, and it depends on what people in your league do. If somebody reaches for like Cooper Kupp with the top 3 or 4 picks, then one of those running backs may fall to you. But it's questionable after pick number 4, I would say. But top 4, get a running back. And Joseph's right. Good.
Go ahead. Because ESPN has Cooper Kupp 3rd overall.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that would apparent to them that would not be a reach to take him top 3.
Right.
And you never know with some people, if somebody's like a Buffalo fan and they really like Josh Allen, maybe they take him number 4 overall. Who knows? But but then it does become tough though. Like let's say you have pick 12 in a 14-team league. There's not going to be any really good running backs.
Right.
But then again, whatever running backs there are, one theory is you better just take one of them because there'll be even, I mean, you have absolutely nobody by the time it gets. I mean, on your second pick, you have it okay. You'd be in about the same boat, but
that's the thing. Like that's a good example. 11th or 12th pick, like you said. You're probably looking at the board and there's like, okay, there's still some really, really good receivers there.
Yeah.
But if you take them, like you said, by the time you get back to you're gonna have no running backs whatsoever.
Yeah. One theory is to take, like, when you get to pick 10, 11, 12, there'll be some great receivers. Let's say you can get Jamar Chase. All right, great. And then when you ride back around to your second pick, let's say you decide, hey, the running backs that are left, I don't know what to make of them. I'll get Josh Allen. Let's say you do something like that. Well, then that's fine. Just be prepared for the running back to be a headache for you all season. But it may work out. It's a tough decision then because, let's say by the time you get down to that pick, is James Conner going to be that much better than Miles Sanders at running back, or that much better than Tony Pollard? I don't know. Like maybe who knows? Like,
I think the number one thing, and I'm guilty of this too. When you're picking fantasy, I'm guilty sometimes of thinking, well, who is this guy? I don't know who this guy is. I mean, he's not a big, but you can't think that way. Like Nathan, you have to look at, okay, running backs, you got to have them. So whether it's Miles Sanders, whether it's James Conner, or whether it's Ted the Hillbilly, if they're running backs and they're productive, you should probably take them. It doesn't really matter. And I also want to ask you guys, when you're looking, I think that we have 16 picks. Am I right, or is it 17?
Either one. I don't know.
All right. Well, let's say 16. I'm going to throw this out. No, I know, but I want to throw this out to you and see what you think. My thinking is, is you take one kicker, obviously, you take one defense, and you take one tight end. Okay. I think you take two quarterbacks for obvious reasons. But I think that your other 11 picks are all running backs and wide receivers. I mean, I think you got to do that.
I disagree. I think that you take in one of those positions, probably a defense, or take some, maybe say it's defense. You take a second defense. It's just like to have something to drop. So like,
right.
You know that like after week 1, after week 2, there's going to be some guy that hits the waiver wire that nobody knew about that, caught 10 balls week 1, right? So if you want to like be in play for that, you need something you can drop real quick that you're not tied to. You know what I mean?
Right, but the problem is you have to be number 1 on the waiver wire to get that guy. I mean, like if some guy has a breakout week 1, unless you're somebody's going to take him, right? I mean, it's hard to get that guy.
I don't know. I mean, I guess, but there could be more than one breakout guy. I mean, maybe you see somebody you want, right? So why? Yeah, that's just my opinion. Like have
that's
a slot
fine. Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
That's basically an empty slot, but you fill it with something you don't need.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I like that.
That's not a bad point. I mean, yeah, that's not a bad point. I'm still at a loss to go back to if there's so many ifs and buts, and well, this theory is good, but how about this? Like there's not one I think like perfect way, and it depends so much on where you draft. But I will say that we talked about how demoralizing it is to not have any running backs late in the year. But
right.
I mean, is it? But if you have a star quarterback at the height of his career, is it going to matter too much? If you have a star quarterback and a star receiver, is it going to matter too much because you're going to get so many points out of them? But then again, I will say it's also as demoralizing it is to know that you're going to get like 1 point out of each of your running backs. It's also pretty demoralizing to have receivers on your roster. Like who knows if they'll even get a catch? Like I've had that before. Like you get guys with 2 catches, 5 yards, like week in and week out. That's pretty demoralizing too.
Yeah.
Well, another thing we didn't talk about too is remember when you set your roster for the week, you could only put 1 quarterback in there, okay? But you could actually put 3 running backs, right? Because you have a flex position. So really, that kind of adds to what we're talking about is that even though what I said about quarterbacks is true, that they have a tendency to give you 18 or more points every week, you only got one of them. And if he has a dud that week, you're done, right, in that position. Whereas when you got 2 running backs starting and a flex position, or 2 wide receivers at a flex, you have the potential of either 3 wide receivers or 3 running backs playing for you. And if you have some quality players at that position, there's a good chance you're going to rack up a lot of points.
Yeah. No, that's an excellent point too.
And Nathan's point too, which is like, even if you have like a pretty good receiver, there's 2 or 3 other receivers out there. So I mean, on the field. So
right.
At the end of the day, you can end up with 2 catches for 23 yards. Whereas if you have a starting running back, when they hand the ball off, he's going to get the ball. So he's going to get the touches. So that's something that's beneficial about running backs too.
True.
Well, that's if you can get one of those running backs. There's so many guys in the league now who they might not get the ball. They have 3 running backs they rotate.
I know. I'm talking about like take somebody like I don't know, Josh Jacobs for Las Vegas. I don't know their other running backs, and he's like kind of down the list a little bit, but odds are they're going to hand him the ball. I mean, so he's going to be out there quite a bit. Again, I don't know how much he splits or doesn't split, but that's just one example. So whereas Devontae Adams could maybe he's covered that game more or for whatever reason he ends up with 2 or 3 catches and like no touchdown. So it's I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to what I said earlier too with the tight ends. A lot of it depends on your quarterback, right? I mean, if you have Tom Brady or Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes, your running back's not going to get quite as many touches, right? But if you have a quarterback like Tannehill or Mitch Trubisky or Daniel Jones, they're going to try to build that offense around the running back, not only from running the football, but from catching the ball out of the backfield. So I think that's another thing to look at is who's the quarterback, and how much, in other words, is the offense designed around the quarterback or is it designed around the running game? Derrick Henry, he's the guy, but in some other offense, a running back may not be the guy,
That's interesting. I think maybe a good overall strategy, no matter what position you're talking about, is to not look so much at the name of the guy you're drafting, but look at the pieces around that player.
Correct.
How that's going to affect his production.
Right.
Which is
exactly
like you said, you can say Devontae Adams, he's a great receiver. He has a lot of skill at the position. He's a good receiver. Well, okay, but if the quarterback's not getting him the ball, if this or that, if they have another receiver who's going to take away all that stuff, maybe he's not as good as a name that you don't associate with being a great receiver. Maybe that guy.
Well, look at it this way. Derrick Henry has played behind Marcus Mariota and Ryan Tannehill. Okay. If Derrick Henry was in Green Bay, would he have the same production? No, exactly. No, probably not. That's my point, is that as great as Derrick Henry is, if he was in Green Bay, there's no way Aaron Rodgers is handing the ball off 25 times. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So I think that's why you have to look at, who's the guy behind center and how much will the running back actually factor into that offense? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think I think a running back has to get the ball 20. He has to touch the ball 20 to 25 times a game to be the guy that's your main guy, and if he doesn't do that, then I think, he's not going to get he's not going to put up a lot of numbers.
Yeah. And the frustrating thing is used to be in in the maybe maybe 15 years ago, every team had a running back, and he was the running back. And maybe there were some who were not as good as the other ones, but they were going to get the ball every time they ran the ball.
That's a good point. Like Nathan said, like there's 32 teams, and you could pretty much go down the list. Used to be, and there's 32 running backs. Maybe one or two teams wasn't the case that they're going to get all the carries, right? So.
Right.
You had your pick of 32 guys. So some are better than others. Some are going to get more carries, but they're going to consistently start. Now it's like there may be like 6 or 7 teams that have one guy, and everybody else kind of splits. It's totally
maybe you're like like some great running backs, some of the top running backs are taken, but you have to take Ahmad Green. It's like, well, okay, but he's the Packers running back. He's getting all the carries.
Yeah. Right.
But now it's if you get it's like that's why it's so frustrating because. I mean, teams legitimately will have at least 3 guys that can get roughly the same amount of carries. The guy get 5, 7, 8. This is ridiculous. I don't know. It used to be maybe the one exception to what we're talking about back in the day was maybe they'd have a third down back sometimes, which I didn't always understand that. Like a guy, I know they used to do that with Adrian Peterson in his heyday. They used to put Chester Taylor in there sometimes a third down. I don't understand that. But
all I got to say is that if there was such a thing as fantasy football when I was growing up, the top 300 would be all running backs because back then they never threw the football, and your wide receiver tight ends just blocked, and your wide receivers were basically 2 of them, and then that was it. So
when they did try to throw the football, your wide receiver might be wide open over the middle, then he's clotheslined by Jack Tatum with no foul. He can play pass. Then he can barely get up off the turf for the next play. You never know what's going to
happen. Exactly. Yeah.
Before we wrap it up, let's we've done this in the past. Each give one sleeper pick and then one overrated guy you're going to stay away from in the draft.
Okay, that's interesting. I like that. I'm glad you remembered that. Why don't you go first since you brought it up?
Okay. So sleeper pick, and again, sleeper being the idea that you're not going to take the guy with the top pick, but is Randall Cobb. So back in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, as you said, Aaron Rodgers lost Devontae Adams. He's familiar with Randall Cobb, so he's comfortable throwing to him. I think Cobb's 12th year in the league, so he's not what he used to be, obviously, but
right.
There's a chance there for some production just for the fact that Rodgers feels comfortable looking for him. So I think that's a guy late, and again, you don't count on him to start, but you could plug him in for some weeks and maybe get some production. That's a sleeper. And then overrated / stay away is for me Tyreek Hill. I mentioned a little bit earlier. I think Tua is terrible. I'll go ahead and say that. I think that He's not going to get. Remember Mike Wallace, the guy that played for the Steelers,
Yeah.
the receiver, and then I think he signed with Miami or something as a free agent and just totally fell off the face of the map because Roethlisberger wasn't throwing to him. Now,
Right.
Granted, Tyreek Hill may be more athletic and better than Mike Wallace, but I think he's not going to be nearly as productive. And you're going to start hearing week 7, week 8, him complaining about stuff. It's just not going to be a good situation, in my opinion. I'm staying away from Tyreek Hill.
All right, excellent. Nathan, you want to go next? Or you want me to go next?
I'll go next. My sleeper is Julio Jones.
Yeah.
He's so low on the list. 67th receiver, 176 overall in ESPN. I know he's older and all this stuff, but I think that could be interesting pairing up with him with Brady. I mean, if he were on any other team, I don't think he would be my sleeper. But with him and Brady in there, I think something special could maybe come of that. So he'd be my sleeper. And the guy I'd stay away from, my overrated guy, I don't know. You make a good point for Tyreek Hill. I do think if things go south, which is a fairly good chance they will in Miami as far as his production, and it's tough for him to get the ball as much as he was in Kansas City, just because Mahomes is a different type of quarterback than what's his name, Tua. He could start to cause problems, like you said, like complaining and stuff. But to go with somebody different though, I'm going to say I'm going to say I don't know. It's tough for my guy to stay away from.
Everybody on the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Well, I don't know if I'll give two.
Overrated. Stay away from. People think highly of him. Not obviously. There's a lot of guys you want to stay away from.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, overrated more than like don't draft this guy. But I'm not saying that. I'm just saying like don't draft him as high as ESPN would have you believe. Would be probably Josh Allen, because like I don't see him being that much more productive than any of these other quarterbacks in the top 10 even or 9. Like it's strange that he's a little overrated with his fantasy production, not like his on the field actual quarterback, but his fantasy production. But I also say this, maybe it's because I don't know anything about him, but Justin Jefferson, like don't take Justin Jefferson before some of these other guys. I mean, come on. I'll be completely honest. I don't know if I've ever heard of his name before this episode. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
that's okay.
He had over 2,000 yards last year receiving.
Did he? Okay, well then maybe I'm wrong. Just this goes to the point we discussed earlier too. I'm falling into that trap of because it's a guy I don't know of. It's a big name. He's not a big name. I'm not going to draft him. Well, I mean, I've had a lot of big names in my fantasy career, and I've ended up losing. So, and a lot of these teams you play, and I've played a lot of teams that I look at the roster at the end of the week, I got hammered. I'm like, who are these guys? But they're putting up 15, 10, 12. So maybe Jefferson would be a great player then. But I'm just gonna say that.
All right. Well, my sleeper pick, and I'm going to put my New York Giants hat on right now. I think my sleeper pick is Saquon Barkley. I think he's rated 15th overall. He's been hurt, but I think with a new coaching staff and a new offense, and the Giants, they seem to be on the right track from the standpoint of organization. Okay, and I think they're going to try to get him the ball, not only running it but also receiving. I think their offensive line's improved. They got 2 really good tackles. This Evan Neal guy they drafted from Alabama looks very good in preseason. The guy they got from Georgia last year has solidified his place at the tackle position, and they've added a lot of other offensive linemen. I think Saquon Barkley, he may not have an offensive rookie of the year type year as he had in 18, but I think he's my sleeper pick. As far as overrated, I think it's Jalen Hurts. I mean, ESPN's got him ranked 6th in quarterbacks. Sporting News has got him ranked 9th. I mean, this is only his second year starting, and the guy's not a quarterback. I mean, the talent he's got around him is not exactly spectacular, and he was a great college quarterback, but I don't see him being the 6th rated overall quarterback. I mean, they've got him ahead of Prescott, Brady, Aaron Rodgers. I mean, come on. This guy is definitely overrated, and I just don't think he's going to have the year everybody thinks he's going to have.
Well, I'll say that jumped out to me too as him being high on the quarterback list. But the reason I didn't bring his name up at all was I feel like he's just a really big gamble. I mean, because I feel like there's a chance where he has a spectacular year, like maybe not from a winning standpoint, but from a fantasy outnumber standpoint, because he runs
but even fantasy wise, like Well, how does ESPN rate him ahead of Brady and Rodgers? Like, do you think
Yeah,
really at the end of the year he's going to have better numbers than Aaron Rodgers?
But I
right.
mean, probably not. But
Why did they rate him that high?
look, I agree. I mean, he probably shouldn't be rated above those guys. But I just feel like
Yeah.
it's a bit. I wouldn't say like he's definitely not gonna do anything. It's just a big gamble. But maybe it's because I've heard Tom Brady apparently in Tampa Bay they have a lot. He has a really different offensive line than he had last year. Like one guy retired, one guy went somewhere else. They had some guy who was competing for one of the offensive line jobs out for the season now with a knee injury. Just like the last game, I think he hurt his knee. So maybe that's something to look at with Bray. And then Rodgers, I mean, I guess they're saying like he had no team around him the last few years. Now he's got even less of a team if that's possible because he doesn't have Devontae Adams. Look, those guys are more consistent. Brady and Rodgers are going to consistently week in, week out get you more than Hurts. And at the end of the year, they'll probably have better seasons than Hurts. But Hurts could have some like really big days. Yeah, it's just a gamble. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
that's all good points, and I think it's been a great show. I'm sure
Yeah.
many of our fans out there have listened to the show have enjoyed it because they're all getting ready to do the same thing, and we can't wait for the season to start, and we're looking forward to it, and it should be a tremendous season. So make sure you hit us up on Twitter at PressBoxPod, on Instagram at PressBoxPod, and then of course our YouTube channel, the PressBox Podcast. For lots of great content. Hit us up. Let us know what your thoughts are. I mean, we threw out a lot of ideas, our ideas, but we want to hear what you think about fantasy football, what your strategy may be, what you think about our sleepers and overrated guys. But again, it's an exciting time, and we're ready for the 2022 season. So for Joseph, for Nathan, I'm Ralph. Thanks for listening to the Press Box Podcast, and we'll see you next time.